pointless. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's review session. We will start in a short while. Thank you so much for making it to today's review session. My name is Juliet Oloch. I am a research associate at Arin, and we'll be starting our session in the next 30 seconds. Meanwhile, I would like to know where you are joining us from today. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you are joining from and what your name is also, so that the other people can be able to know who you are. All right. Thank you so much once again for joining today's session. I am Juliet Olwach, and I'll be moderating today's review. So I'd like to start us off without wasting much time. And today we have a very interesting topic that we'll be discussing towards the Africa Climate Summit, which will be hosted here in Nairobi, Kenya. And we are thinking about the research and policy linkages in relation to this year's theme and what the priorities for Africa is and should be. So we have been working with a number of partners also towards the upcoming summit, and we will be hosting a number of side events. But just to give you a brief about today's review, we intend to engage our fellows and researchers who are in this space of climate change to synthesize the key lessons from the ongoing research projects and from the relevant studies that you have done that are related to this year's theme, which is driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. So this is part of accelerating awareness and engaging policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders in shaping evidence-based discussions before the summit, during the summit, and after the summit. Now, we'll be sharing the briefs from our pre-engagements with the Africa Climate Summit Secretariat as part of the non-state actors, and also with the African Climate Summit on the horizon. Our objectives are very clear. Number one is to uncover the gaps that are hindering the progress, to seize the untapped opportunities that lie ahead, and also to highlight key priorities that will be redefined, or rather that will redefine the trajectory for the entire African continent based on evidence. So we invite you to actively participate in today's session that will be presented to us by two of our colleagues who are in the policy and development space, that is Mr. Charles Tonui and Leah Aoko, who will be presenting to us today's session. So without further ado, I would like to invite Charles, who will take over the program from here and she will co-present with Leah. Thank you and welcome, Charles. And just as Charles prepares to unmute, I would like to also notify us that for our Francophones today, we will not have our interpretation because the interpreter is caught up in an emergency and he's not able to be present for today's session. Nonetheless, we'll be able to share this recording and the other material with you should you wish to have a look at our presentations. So Charles, kindly feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, just a moment as we reach out to Charles. He had traveled outside the country and I know he's probably trying to get a good spot where there's internet, but I'll be able to catch him in a few minutes. Okay, I already can see Leah is here with us, and since she's co-presenting with Charles, I would like to welcome her to take over the program. Leah, feel much welcomed at this stage to kindly take us through today's presentation.
All right, please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Can you see me? I think that's clear.
Yes, we can hear.
All right, so my name is Leah Aoko. from the African Research and Impact Network. I'm the policy associate, and I'll be co-presenting with Charles. He may or may not be able to join because he is currently airborne. And so I'll just request that you pull up my slides, please. Hello, Juliet. Are you able to share my slides?
Yes, Leah, we are sharing in a bit.
So
Yeah, just a minute.
just to make a brief introduction, today's just a brainstorm, and we know that the Africa Climate Week is coming up in a few days. So we just want to think through what is the opportunity for the research community to participate in the conversations and to get involved in the negotiations that will be going on. What is our opportunity in leading to evidence-informed policy making? Who are the strategic partners we want to be having discussions with? So these are just a few ideas that we have that we thought it fit before we have that auspicious event. We have, we can brainstorm as a research community on what we want our priorities to be. We've been engaging as non-state actors, looking at what are some of the ideas that we want to really be manifest or to be emphasized upon during those discussions. And that's the presentation that we are having this afternoon. So basically, we'll be looking at the contribution of the research community to the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week 2023. What is innate in terms of climate change and the development agenda for Africa, and then how can these discussions then, lead to the COP28 prioritization? So just building up on what we had last year during COP27, how can these discussions lead to the African agenda being emphasized and just having that forefront in the COP28 discussions? The next slide. So as non-state actors in Africa, we looked at what are the clusters that we can have so that various ideas are represented from the regional civil society organizations, from PACJA, that is the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, which involves Arin as a research institution and another non-state actors. We have faith-based organizations, the African private sector and financial institutions, women and gender constituency, youth organization, academia and research, labor movements, health, indigenous people organizations who are often forgotten in these discussions. We want to bring them on board so that their perspectives are taken into account even ahead of the Africa Climate Week and Summit. Farmer organizations, conservation and nature-based solutions organizations. So these are some of the clusters that we have been engaging with to pull together a pool of ideas that you can present as a fortified unit during the Climate Week. Next slide, please. So in the next slides, we are just basically going to see how have we been engaging. We've had some convenings in the past few weeks with PACJA and other non-state actors. We can go to the next slide. With PACJA and non-state actors, we've been having conversations around the Africa Climate Summit and how it's going to be structured. We know that this year we are thinking about the green growth agenda, and that's why I'm terming this sort of session as a brainstorm, because after this we'll be having a discussion and a feedback session on what can we learn as Africans, what can we take advantage of in this loss and damage dispensation, in this just transition dispensation? What does it mean for Africa? If you look at the thematically, what is really topical currently ahead of the week, we have energy transition, renewable energy, which still remains to be a thorny issue when you look at the stakeholders that are involved, balancing social and economic interests, even political interests. When you talk about green energy and renewable energy, how can this lead us to aspects such as clean cooking, and access to these clean cooking initiatives, access to clean cooking facilities, if you may, for example, the villager who may not necessarily know what it is, or who may not necessarily see the essence and the point in embracing all these types of progressive energy solutions, or green minerals. Some of the economic interests that are involved are really heavy. They are influential people, even leaders who are involved in the mining industry. How then can we get their buy-in when we are talking about green metals, when we're talking about the global supply of minerals from Africa? You know that Africa is really rich in minerals, right? It's really rich when you talk about the development agenda. When you look at green hydrogen, how are you going to get the buy-in of various stakeholders from the economic and political sphere? Other aspects that are really key during the climate week around green growth for Africa is sustainable agriculture. We know that agriculture is the backbone for most economies across the continent. How can we leverage on this by engaging various farmer groups, engaging the market, engaging pastoralist communities to embrace a green growth and a green development in the agricultural sector? I remember attending a convention or a meeting in West Africa, in Abidjan, and we were discussing how can farmers embrace green growth. And some of them, their farmer representatives were telling us, look, we just want our profit. So if you're going to tell us to do 1, 2, 3, whose results you're going to see in 3 years or 2 years, that is time we do not have. We need to provide for our families. We need to put food on the table for our children. So for them, it's the chemical are available is what they are going to be using, and convincing them otherwise is really difficult, or it's daunting, to say the least. How can we engage marine communities to embrace resilient water systems? And so those are just some of the aspects that will be reflected upon when you think about the green growth agenda. Another tenet is the sustainable infrastructure and urbanization, that Africa is really growing rapidly. There are so many infrastructural needs across the continent, right? So what are the implications of this? There's an increase in pollution. There's a reduction in, let's say, the resilience metrics. There's an increase in informal settlements, and urban areas are lacking poor initiatives or poor housing. So how can we incorporate aspects such as green housing in our urban areas, where the main motivation for most people to be in these areas is economic activity, right? Is the industries that are available, that are providing employment opportunities for young people, for the middle class. So how are we going to embrace green housing? And when you talk about net zero and resilient cities, how can this be practically achieved across Africa? And then, of course, natural capital. So some of the ideas or some of the other tenets that are being considered in the green growth agenda is adaptation and resilience to climate risk. And this I have partly touched on under the urbanization tenet, but just to emphasize other ideas such as multi-hazard early warning systems. Governments are now saying we do not want to be merely reactive, we want to be proactive. So if you're going to have a flood, can we have a system where we know that this is going to occur? We've seen the signs and we are taking steps to prevent it, so that it's preventative. There's a common saying that we learned in school, at least in my school, that prevention is better than cure, right? So this is sort of the ideology that urban areas or local authorities are now leaning towards. I know in a country like Zambia, it has really progressed. Their early warning systems is far more advanced, probably because of the nature of hazard that they experience during various times of the years. But how can we, as an African continent, leverage on this example and several other examples and borrow it into our system, or adjust, not just copy and paste, but of course adjust into our context, into our countries, into our localities, to ensure that the impact of hazard is greatly reduced. And of course, other aspects such as national crop. There's also the thorny issue of climate finance and carbon credits. And this is very interesting, because I remember sitting in a meeting and one of the funders was saying, we know the problem you're going to say is finance, you want more money. But we have to think as Africans, more money for what, right? We will say, okay, want mitigation, which is very, very common anyway. Adaptation measures, which research has shown that adaptation is far much less financed than mitigation. And there needs to be emphasis, there needs to be growth in embracing adaptation initiatives, preventative initiatives that lead to strengthening the resilience of communities who are greatly affected by the adverse impacts of climate change. One of the challenges that just comes to mind when you're talking about climate finance and carbon credits is the financial structures that we have across African countries may not be, quote unquote, the best. There's a lot of complaints around corruption, around impunity, around poor governance systems, such that even when, let's say, $1 billion is given for an initiative to the Kenyan government, by the time the person in Masai, a woman in Masai who is greatly impacted by climate change, even feels $1 of that financial contribution, of that financial initiative in whatever form, whether it's a borehole, whether it's drought-resistant crops initiatives, or whether it's training to embrace other forms of livelihood, by the time they experience that sort of contribution firsthand or in a very meaningful manner, they hardly ever, right? And it's just about 10% of climate finance trickling down to these local communities, to these vulnerable communities. So when we talk about the green growth, we also need to reflect as African countries, or as in our localities, because we are representative here in this group, we need to reflect about how climate finance that we constantly clamor for, that we constantly advocate for, that we constantly do research on, how this climate finance can benefit local and vulnerable groups, how we can strengthen our financial structures to increase accountability even amongst the political class, such that we have strengthened climate finance strategies and initiatives. The next slide, please. Yes, so what are the entry points for the research community? Because there's a lot of advocacy that is going around what I have just mentioned, but we see some opportunities for the research community. We are anticipating the African Leaders Nairobi Declaration, possibly as a solid outcome of the Climate Week. And on this, we envision a green growth and a climate finance agenda. As I said, we are all about the money, and solutions for Africa, practical and sustainable solutions for Africa, because these are conversations that have been ongoing, and it's just about time that we have a broad commitment, for green growth, and specific commitments for carbon credits, regulatory frameworks, for energy transition, for just transition. When we say just transition, it's become a buzzword, but what does it mean? And most importantly, what does it mean for inclusivity? What does it mean for vulnerable groups of people? We also have opportunity for pathway to a new global financial deal that includes at scale and fit for purpose financing instruments and products to be delivered by various funding institutions. And this is very important because different countries, different communities, different marginalized groups have different needs. So how can these financial deals be fitted for quote unquote fitted for purpose in such a way that they align themselves to the needs of this community? So This can only be done by engaging the research communities. We are the ones on the ground, quote unquote. We are the ones who are even interacting with these challenges through the community members firsthand. So we probably are in a better place to advise or to give credible data, to give credible evidence that can go into effective and contextualized financial instruments. And then, of course, investment commitments that will be showcasing, what are the deals across the continents that are needed in various sectors, whether it be energy, manufacturing, etc. Announcements on tangible progress on ongoing continent and global initiatives. Of course, again, this really leverages on the research community because, as I said, we are the ones who are conducting these various projects. We are the ones interacting with communities. We are the ones interacting with local authorities, leaders, economic stakeholders. So, but again, better placed to inform such discussions, and of course, the road for implementation through key declarations, and not just declarations for political sakes, but declarations that are also evidence-driven, that can inform policy. Next slide, please. So, of course, if you haven't registered, please take an opportunity to register for the Africa Climate Week. So some of the strategic African pursuits for the ACES, as I said, one, how can this be reflected in the COP28 decisions? Two, what are the effectiveness, enhancing the effectiveness of Africa's engagement in overall international dialogue on climate change, not to be spoken for, but to speak for ourselves. What are our priorities in the green growth agenda? Three, a demonstration of a genuinely greater ambition and accountability. As I've said, accountability is really key when you're talking about climate finance and how this can enhance adaptation, right? And then for addressing the elephant in the room, that is just transition, we are saying that, look, Africa is one of the least contributors to the ongoing climate change mayhem. We still need to develop as a continent. So how can this be balanced through various concepts? We have people saying, okay, development has to be sustainable. It has to incorporate just transition. What is just transition? Just transition for Kenya may not be just transition for South Africa. So this is a term that really needs to be unpacked through various discussions that will be ongoing at the Africa Climate Week. Next slide, please. So as we wait for the next slide, yes. So one of the key expected deliverables, as I've said, through engaging the non-state actors would be, to the various categories of the non-state actors, would be strategic engagements to deliberate on the details of the summit, to identify the role, ensure continued engagement with non-state actors. We're saying that after the Africa Climate Week, the declarations that will have been made, the resolutions that will have been made, the commitments that will have been made, various stakeholders will need to be held accountable. And the non-state actors, various categories, will be instrumental and will be key in this follow-up process, in this feedback process. Again, there needs to be a definition to define the action agenda of non-state actors. What do we want to achieve? What is voice? What are we representing? Through the various tracks, I think I've seen that 3 or 4 thematic tracks in the Africa Climate Week. So whose voice are we representing, right? Is it the stakeholders? Is it the local communities? Is it the funders' voice? We need to make that clear. And then, of course, supporting planning in key processes, exploring how to participate. Various categories of non-state actors have applied for side events, and some have gotten confirmation for the same. So it's really exciting because we are looking forward to, again, incorporating research, evidence-based activities, evidence-based projects, and how that can lead to then informed commitments by the various political agencies that will be represented in the Africa Climate Week. And then, of course, proactively engaging various stakeholders, collectively raising sources to support the summit. We are looking at collaboration opportunities with various projects avoiding duplication of initiatives. So that will really be a platform for other organizations to interact. Sorry. Yeah, just allow me to place my phone in that manner. Yes, to interact in leading to impactful project undertaking or impactful initiatives that will incorporate the needs and priorities for the local communities. The next slide, please. Yeah, so these are just a demonstration of some of the engagements that we've had. We've had engagements in June, July with PACJA. We've had convenings. We've had interactions with the CEO of the Africa Climate Summit. So he's really been professional is the word, professional enough to engage the non-state actors through our representatives. I was part of the meetings as well, where we just discussed some of the key priorities that I have mentioned when it comes to the green growth agenda and fronting that really as a solid output going into the COP28 discussions. The next slide, please. So some of the progress that we've had from engagement with the secretariat is that some cluster members and leads have managed to register for side events and have been confirmed for the same. Registration for exhibitions has also happened with heavy presence from the research community. Towards COP28, because we're looking at a bigger picture, identification and registration of COP28 events. Of course, there's a bigger awareness amongst the research community and other non-state actors. We are seeing even religious bodies coming up, to embrace the climate change adaptation agenda or resilience agenda. So they're taking up spaces depending on their prioritization to just bring to light the African agenda from the local perspective. We've also seen the research community building momentum to mobilizing lessons and concrete cases, because sometimes, the problem is, not the problem, but sometimes advocacy does not really incorporate evidence, and the research community brings that strongly, mobilizing concrete case studies that can be used to illustrate the African position. Next slide. So still on what we've managed to achieve, we've managed to have a shared understanding amongst the members of the clusters, the various categories that I introduced at the beginning, dialogue processes, mapping out of spaces in the program of the Africa Climate Summit, sharing of key messages from the clusters, sustained pressure on the Africa Climate Week to implement inclusive. We want all groups to be involved, marginalized groups to be involved, local communities to be involved, indigenous communities to be involved. We also have had engagements with other bodies such as the UN, AU, to just further advance for the pro-Africa green growth agenda. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is a feedback session. We want to hear what are your perspectives, because there are members here who are going to be strongly representing inside events during the Africa Climate Week. I'm including myself. So what are your research priorities, or what do you think we can strongly emphasize on, given the themes, given the tracks that are going to be represented? What would be our key strategic research positions, and what lessons can we take into this auspicious event so that we ensure the African voice is not left out as we go into COP28? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah, for that presentation and for, just trying to show what Arin and partners have been working on in the lead up to the summit. but also kind of giving us key entry points for research in terms of creating a pathway to global financial deals, including the different financial instruments that are available, but also highlighting, some investment commitments that still needs to be researched upon. Yeah, I think at this point it's really open to the floor to kind of give feedback to what Arin is already doing together with the partners, but also to really try to see what kind of research and policy linkages we have, what should be the priorities for Africa in the lead up, or rather in this summit. So I want to welcome Brian from Arin. He has, I think, a question or a comment, and then we'll proceed. But if you'd like to give any feedback, already you can use the reaction button to raise your question or to give your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet and Leah, for that comprehensive overview. But my first comment would be maybe Leah, you could start with just briefing the congregation what is the Green Growth Agenda, because I believe not all the team members are aware of the Green Growth Agenda and what approach it takes towards economic growth and development. But coming back to the policy lens around the climate summit, and also how they are kind of interlinking with the Green Growth Agenda. So I have two questions, and one would be, what do you think, or do you suppose will be the role of maybe the international collaboration in leveraging research to design effective climate policies that facilitate global green growth objectives? And then the second one would be, maybe how can government and local institutions and the CSOs ensure that there's a continuous feedback loop between research, policy implementation, and the protection of maybe to kind of foster an approach to promote green growth in a changing environment? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brian. And now, Leah, please feel free. But I see Charles would like to come in before he checks out to the airport. So, Leah, as we brainstorm on Brian's question and comment, I would like to welcome Charles. Please, Charles, if you're able to unmute, kindly go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Juliet, and thanks everyone for joining this session. It's quite very important, especially for the research community and being present, especially in the non-state actors committee with the rest of the other clusters. But of course, what we have looked over the time is that limited engagement, especially with the researchers and the policymakers, because one could be they are very busy to really in the research agenda, which is not really easy as such, and then of course the design of our engagements over the years in research projects. Of course, we have provided that we are going to engage with the policymakers, but when you look at especially Africa Climate Summit engagement with researchers is quite limited. So your presence today is a foundation because you realize you are swallowed in when you are engaging with the other non-state actors, and we don't really come out very strongly. Of course, we have been placed with the academia, which also plays a very research perspective, but we have got the non-state actors who are really focused on research. So in response to Brian's question around the green growth, if you look at the East African member states, based on some of the studies we did 5 years ago, they have developed the green framework policies and also the public-private sector public-private partnership legislations. But the infusion of research and policy linkage is still quite limited. I was privileged to sit in the Kenya's Green Growth Assessment, which was led by UNEP. And then also we did a regional study where we looked at the water, transport, and energy infrastructure in East Africa. And we are looking at how are those infrastructure really integrating green components or green elements. And when you look at also in comparison with close to 400 other initiatives globally. So the focus for Africa to really rethink green growth is quite timely because one, the transition to green energy or green investment is now the responsibility of everyone globally. Though Africa is energy or other infrastructure or development initiatives are contributing very low to in terms of emissions, but already Africa is setting the agenda that in going forward in terms of achieving sustainable development, pursuing green development pathways should be the foundation for every economy now. So the design of this climate summit, and of course, Africa Climate Week discussions, CCDA, the 11th Climate and Development Conference, and of course, the discussions toward COP28 is that the global financial architecture, which is being discussed right now, especially to address loss and damage, is very pertinent in terms of being an enabler towards pursuing green growth. Because, for instance, Kenya, we faced a drought which really impacted different sectors. So there is need to support those sectors so that we can have even domestic and international financing going towards green growth. So it comes from the multifaceted approach, but the main foundation now is to pursue this joint research thinking towards supporting or co-generating relevant evidence for to inform operationalization of green road frameworks and public-private partnership legislations in East Africa. Thank you very much. Let me exit and let my colleague also respond. And of course, we welcome everybody to contribute so that you can have a development position that you are going to submit to the Africa Climate Summit NANSET as a position. Thank you.
For your interventions. I see a comment from Dr. Marie, and thank you so much, Dr. Marie, for joining us. Great presentation, support capacity building on gender budgeting, including on integration of responsive budgeting, international budgeting, to advance gender responsive climate policies, plans, strategies, and action plans. And that is gender actions plans for ensuring effectiveness, fairness, and sustainability of the green growth agenda. So powerful and on point. Thank you, Dr. Marie, for that comment and point to note. So I want to welcome back Claire to respond to Brian, even as we keep an eye on more questions and comments from our participants.
Thank you so much, Brian, for your question. It has just reminded me of a discussion we had on the 5 pillars of green growth. And this is basically just having a balance between fostering economic growth and development while ensuring that we still take care of the environment, right? Because our well-being at the end of the day depends on the well-being of the environment. So green growth really it is a concept that ensures, as my colleague has mentioned, there's a balance between economic development, whether it be in the energy sector, the water sector, urbanization, agriculture, and just ensuring that even in our quest for economic enhancement, we do not destroy the environment. We still maintain and protect our environment for both present and future generations. So aside from that, I don't know if there's any other, I think there's a second part that he had mentioned.
Yes, there is. Brian, you could kindly come in.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I think the second part has been mentioned. It was just around communicating, and we know that policymakers are not good at maybe communicating evidence. So mine was just to get a clear picture of how the different stakeholders, the government, the private sector, the CSOs, can maybe ensure that these policies are effective and are communicated across board. But I think Charles has mentioned that. Maybe just a quick one around the progress and reporting. We are currently talking about loss and damage and adaptation metrics and all those things. Do we have some form of metrics that can be used to track or measure the progress of green growth and climate finance initiatives, maybe in Africa, not from the global scale? And are these frameworks or metrics transparent, and are there accountability to measure maybe the results and identify areas for any improvement? So if these are available, I'd really love to know. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And just to chime in on the perspectives that Charles had shared, there really is a sort of a disconnect when you think about policymakers and how they interpret evidence, how evidence is presented to them. Remember, these are not people who will sit down and comprehensively read and evaluate a project output report that you've done from community engagements or engagements with various stakeholders. So how evidence is presented to them is very crucial, right? And it largely informs how that evidence is incorporated into policy and other legal frameworks. Unfortunately, the problem, I don't know if it's an African problem. I want to safely presume that it's not solely an African problem, but the challenge always is in implementation, right? So we have comprehensive sort of frameworks that have been developed, whether it be on, we have very good act on the Water Act in Kenya, we have the MCA, we have really, really good legal frameworks as a country. But when you look at the implementation aspects, you then wonder, why should we add of policies on top of the policies that are already not being implemented? And there are various factors that go into that, but some of the key factors are that the policymakers may have limited capacity, so totally not lacking, but just have limited capacity on how to bring these crucial policies, these crucial steps to life. So for example, if you find that it's a policy, let's say on agricultural production, and you have someone in place who may not even have the know-how of the green growth agenda, they may ask, what is the green growth agenda? And maybe this is someone who does not also attend the Arin reviews to know what the green growth agenda is, right? So there's a disconnect, there's a knowledge disconnect that then translates into aspects of non-implementation. So I just wanted to chime in on that. And then on the measurements, how can we measure green growth? Highly debatable, highly contestable. We don't have a one-size-fits-all answer, but there is a green growth measurement framework. It's a global framework that then informs contextualized metrics that should be developed by various countries, depending on their development. So yes, there's a global green growth measurement framework that you can look up. And really, this is just to catalyze the investment, innovation, and the environmental protection nexus. And it has various aspects, such as aspects of input, production, outputs, consumption, investments, and it's sort of a cyclic framework that then determines or helps countries to determine whether they are really on the path to green growth, whether their development is sustainable and incorporates that agenda. So you can look it up. There are various indicators that have been developed by the OECD, that is the Green Growth Indicators of 2017. But then remember, these are the report, you can definitely read the report, but remember these indicators may not fit all contexts. We are currently on the verge of implementing a project that will be looking at adaptation metrics. So this will probably lead into some of these discussions or feed into some of these discussions. But yes, there are metrics that are indicators from global reports, but still needs to be contextualized to the African agenda.
Thank you so much. Brian, do you want to come in again?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Just trying to connect your second comment around the needs and Dr. Marie's comment around capacity building from the gender lens. And my thinking would be then maybe a key priority that we could prioritize as researchers and policymakers would be maybe assessing the capacity building needs of governments, institutions, and the local communities to effectively implement and monitor green growth and climate finance initiatives. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Brian. So I see Benjamin. Sorry, someone is speaking.
No, it was me, Juliet. I wanted to say that yes, yes, some of these practitioners genuinely do not know how to implement some of these. They don't even understand these concepts, or they have limited understanding of these concepts. So us as the researchers, it is our responsibility. We should take it upon ourselves to interpret it or to configure the information that we have from all the journal papers that we are churning out to these practitioners in the form of capacity building exercises, so that they have the know-how. Because as Leah, even in as much as I understand maybe the green growth agenda, for example, let me just use that. I'm not a policy maker, right? I'm just a researcher. So how does that feed into implementation if I do not find a way of interpreting and configuring the information I have to these people who are responsible for implementing various initiatives that will lead to this? So yeah, a capacity building needs assessment is crucial. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Leah. Benjamin and Raquel have questions. So our last question was from a gentleman. So I want to welcome Raquel, and then we'll have Benjamin.
Hi, Juliet. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm just thinking out loud, and there's a comment that both presenters mentioned, that there's this problem of us as researchers finding a space or a niche in which we could contribute. And from the discussion that's already happened, it's quite clear that we have discursive legitimacy, in that we understand the issues that are there, the people that are being affected by all these initiatives that are going to come in. And we also understand this other side of the problem, that the political side of things also needs some level of knowledge pluralization, so that you do not give them a whole encyclopedia of information, you give them something that is easier to take up. So that is a juncture in which we could stand. And that is something that you could present as, if I could call it, a communication nexus, such that you're able to communicate what this green growth is to the farmer that Leah was referring to in that small village. And that way you're able to reach them and explain the necessities, so that even adoption of whatever comes from the policy side goes on smoothly. And then on this other side of the politicians, then we start coming up with knowledge products such as 2-pagers or policy briefs, things that can easily express what it is that we want to talk to and be taken up without too much time that is needed to actually analyze all these texts that we are always producing. Then the second comment that I had was on, and following up with what Brian was talking about on the monitoring part, I'm wondering whether we would want to position ourselves in the sense that we have a way of anticipating the interactions that are there between the different sectors. So when you're talking about food systems, the production bit, the processing bit, there are always interactions. So if we could come up with a way of anticipating where the different sections interact, that way we could leverage the best points that you can then inject these limited funds to, then you would make a strong case as to why a politician or a policymaker should listen to one thing vis-a-vis the other.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. Indeed, what we've been trying to do, at least I know the Africa Research and Impact Network is doing this, and many other organizations anyway, is to develop policy briefs from the various projects that we have, so that these are just really short informatory documents that summarize the large reports that we submit to our right. So that really can help in that communication nexus. The opportunity that the Africa Climate Week gives us, which we are glad it's in Nairobi, the opportunity it gives us is to interact with these policymakers, because many of them will be there, whether it's on their own political agendas or to further the economic agenda or the sustainability agenda. They will be there. So our participation and the emphasis that we need to put ourselves strategically in our engagements with these practitioners or policymakers is really key. It's really key, because if you have a side event and you know that 1 to 3 persons are going to be part of the side event, be it be local authorities, be it be minister from various parts of the continent, and even globally, if you may, it's really important that you position, as an organization, position yourself strategically, evidence-informed, evidence that can lead to policy-making decisions, right? Because that is what they are looking for. After you present the 90% or the 5%, I've seen just an example from Marie in the charts. After you present that, the policymaker will ask you, okay, what do I do about these figures? What do I do? What initiatives? What do you suggest? That's where our recommendations come in. So really, thank you for that. Various strategies to fill in the gap in the communication aspect. And the other one is, getting politicians to listen. There's, in one of the projects, I know part of the initial steps we took was to look at the government agenda, the government manifesto, and to see where does this align, whether it's, let's say, for example, climate resilience, how does it align with the county government agenda, for example? How does it align with the national government agenda? Because most times we find that when we approach these offices with the face of, this is what you have in your manifesto, or this is what you have in your development agenda for example, Nairobi County, it becomes easier to initiate discussions, because they then feel that them engaging in that is furthering their, whether it be political commitments, etc., but it enhances or catalyzes political goodwill. Remember, that is really essential when you're dealing with policymakers. You have to have that buy-in. So having inroads to even, we have some of the MPs who are quote unquote green MPs. So how can you leverage on that type of representation in parliament to further the economic agenda? And it could be in any sector, right? It could be in the water sector, it could be in dealing with women, enhancing their resilience, it could be in the urban areas with the local county. So it could be, I'm using it just as a blanket example. So yeah, how can we use these green politicians to further the green growth agenda, or to further any other development aligned agenda? So that would be another inroad. Another aspect that I remember we were discussing
as part of the non-state actors. And some people are saying, how about some of us become some of these policymakers, elect one of us to sit in these bodies, to sit in these public committees, to sit in these commissions, to be part of the presidential task force on environmental enhancement of protection. So just various not weapons, quote unquote weapons that we can develop, or strategies that we can develop to really put our agenda strongly. But primarily, and of focus right now, we have to take advantage of this climate week coming to us within this context, but also taking advantage of this climate week to enhance the African voice ahead of COP28, because that will be very, very crucial in furthering climate justice. Yeah.
Thank you, Leah. Dr. Marie, please go ahead. All right, so I'm not sure if Dr. Marie, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I think I was off. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Yes, we can.
Okay, I just want to thank all of you. This has been a great presentation, and I'm happy that you'll be participating in the climate change meeting. And you've just indicated that you have evidence, you've generated evidence and policy briefs. These are good documents, but I just hope be very strategic, have a strategic plan on how, whom I map out, whom do you want to reach? Which networks can you form? Who are the great partners at the county level? Whom should you be connecting with at the county level, really to advocate for the green energy? So during the conference, have a few flyers that you can showcase who you are and how you can be used. And I think it was also a good suggestion that how can part of this team be used as board members, as think tanks, really to give an input into the development agenda. So my advice to Arin is that you're doing a good job. Just continue to be strategic, have a strategic plan, map out your networks, partnerships, communicate what you're doing, and be very strategic on the communication. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daktari. That is well noted, and we will for sure action that. I want to welcome Benjamin, who has a question as well. Before we call it a Q&A session, unless I'm locking anyone out. Benjamin, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick one, Leah. What further research avenues do you see emerging from your work, particularly in terms of refining policy approaches, addressing gaps in knowledge, or adapting strategies to evolving environments and economic conditions?
Thanks, Benjamin. Leah?
Well, oh, sorry, let me just take that question again, Benjamin. Please repeat your question.
What further research avenues do you see emerging from your work, particularly in terms of refining policy approaches, addressing gaps in knowledge, or adapting strategies to the evolving environmental and economic conditions?
Well, thank you so much for your question. Well, this really is thought-provoking. It needs a bit of thought into it, even in terms of answering. But what comes on top of my head for further research avenues, I'm really keen on us engaging in more inclusive research that looks into the specific needs of marginalized communities and groups. This I say because we have new categories of emerging vulnerabilities. I mean, the adverse impact of climate change, it has affected various groups differently, and previous vulnerabilities have been further disadvantaged. So I'm really looking at how can we enhance the resilience of vulnerable groups of people, and specifically persons with disabilities, because I feel that they are mostly left out in our research. I mean, there's limited material even on the same. So how can we enhance the resilience of this category of groups within the community? So that's just on top of my head, where, I'm thinking of novel research avenues that we can embark on, or not necessarily embark on, but incorporate into what we have been doing. And then refining policy. As I mentioned, we realized that there's a bit of disconnect between the research work that we are doing and the policy needs, how it translates into policy. So that's really something that we are intentionally doing. We are not yet there, but I think we are perfecting the art of engaging policymakers, so that at the end of the day, our big reports are not just sitting on a shelf and the funders are happy and everyone goes home. We are still able to, at the end of the day, we are still able to incorporate this into practical steps that can be implemented, can ultimately lead to a change with the various groups that we've been working with. Yes, and then so yeah, that's how I see our work evolving: more inclusivity, more policy engagement, more evidence-informed policy engagements, and strategic stakeholder engagements as well. Yeah. There's a comment by Gitundu, thought-provoking as well, on understanding people's interests to incentivize them, which is very key, of course, in terms of political will, but then the interests of the community. Now, this is very interesting, because there's a time we were engaging a community group. I think it was in an informal settlement, and it was a project that looks to propure urban planning, right? And some of the groups were telling us, okay, I understand that people who may not understand Kiswahili, so just interpretively, you've come here to ask us the challenges that we're facing. But there's this organization that also came to us to ask us the challenges that we're facing. So what you should do is to go to that organization and take the report, and you'll find those challenges that we're facing, because they are the same. So in short, what were they trying to tell us? They were trying to tell us that there's a bit of engagement fatigue. They're like, we have said over and over again what our needs are, what our interests are, what our priorities are, what are the challenges we are facing. We've even provided recommendations to strengthen resilience, to enhance adaptation initiatives within the local communities, to advance resilience in terms of urbanization. We have already said these things. So instead of us repeating ourselves, why don't you go to the leaders and ask them to implement these things for us? So most times the disconnect is not necessarily in in whether or not we have the community needs. We have them. We have projects that engage these people over and over and over and over again, until they're even tired of mentioning their problems. And they send us to political leaders. And you see, that is where the communication gap is, and that is what we need to strategically in on, to see how can we take these problems to the ears of these people who are responsible of taking practical steps to enhance and ameliorate and better their plight. How can we have their ear for them to put in place initiatives that will assist the local communities? So I think that would be the last comment from myself, I'll hand over back to Juliet. But very interesting discussion. Looking forward to seeing you at the Africa Climate Week. I will post my email address and number on the chat so that in case you have any ideas, we'll all be there anyway, hopefully. Please register, we'll all be there. We can exchange ideas, we can look at collaboration activities. I'll be excited to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. And we've come to the end of today's discussion. I really appreciate your feedback, which will be very useful to us in progressing further with this kind of initiative that we have started towards the Africa Climate Summit. So on behalf of the Africa Research and Impact Network, allow me to thank you so much, first of all, for making time to be part of this discussion, but also contributing substantively. You can be sure that your recommendations, your comments will be incorporated into the Africa Climate Summit agenda through our partners and all our stakeholders. And to that regard, we want to say asante sana for being the voice of Africa, joining us from the different regions, from west to east to Central Africa and beyond. So thank you so much for making today's review a success. And I was just closing there, but I see a question from Florence. So do we want to respond to that question in 1 minute? Or Leah, please?
Yes, I don't know why these difficult ones come at the end, but let me just read through. In meaningful impact amidst the landscape of conferences, including the ACW. How can these platforms synergize their collective efforts to ensure that the discussions translate into real-world solutions and actions? Just up until that point, we have outcome documents from these various engagements. So what we do, even as non-state actors ahead of the ACW, is to come up with a common position, being informed by previous engagements that have been advancing the same agenda, so that we are not repetitive, and we can have outcomes from meaningful engagements. Let's say the Resilience Evidence Forum in South Africa, for example. We take the outcome documents and we review to see how can we incorporate this into the agenda that we are trying to come up with. So it is indeed time to move beyond conversations, of course, and weave a network of collaboration that truly shapes our environmental future. Absolutely. What innovative models of collaboration and follow through can help us avoid the conference fatigue and foster impactful change? Well, there definitely is not going to be a cessation of conferences anytime soon, especially because COP28 is ahead of us. So there are various summits, workshops that will be going on. But how can we translate this into impactful change? As I said, by taking this information to the people who will be responsible for impactful change. Because as I mentioned, despite my eloquent understanding of these concepts, or my eloquent understanding of these engagements, and even for each and every one of us, so long as we are not responsible for those implementation initiatives, it might be a bit difficult. It could be possible, but it might be a bit difficult. So fostering impactful change is really is dependent on us closing in the communication gap that we've really reiterated in this discussion. How can we involve the policymakers, and how can science inform policy, right? How can science inform policy, so that at the end of the day, the frameworks that are being put in place, the frameworks that are being implemented, are backed by credible research and science and outputs. So the more we press together, the more impactful we are going to be. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Leah. That was you handled it really well, despite complaining that is a difficult one. So thank you so much for that. And we have come to the end of today's session. As I had mentioned earlier, thank you so much for making these reviews a success. We don't exist without you, and your input is really critical to providing evidence to the African climate voices. So thank you so much for being part of this very powerful movement of change makers. We are proud of you as the Arin Secretariat, and we really look forward to having more of such impactful sessions every week. So also want to take this opportunity to thank Claire for presenting on behalf of the Arin Secretariat, and also for Charles in absentia, who had to drop out to catch his flight back to Kenya. Thank you so much for making this possible. And to our Francophones, I really apologize once again. Today we were not able to have our interpretation services as our interpreter had an emergency that he had to attend to. Nonetheless, we'll have interpretation next week, and we really hope that you'll be able to make it. So on behalf of the ARIN Secretariat, the Executive Director, and all members of the ARIN Fellowship Board, we want to say thank you so much for making today's review a success. At this point, I would like to declare the review session closed, and we wish you a fruitful and restful weekend ahead. Thank you and have a good one.